On the morning of the 10th of August, 1893, three men went out shooting rabbits in a wood on a rented estate in Argyll on the west coast of Scotland. The youngest was Windsor Dudley Cecil Hambrough. He was 20 years old, and he was going to be very rich. On his 21st birthday, about a year away, he stood to inherit £200,000 from a family banking fortune. The second man was his tutor, Alfred John Monson, who was 33 and had been living with the young man for 3 years. The third called himself Edward Scott and said he was a boating engineer, and he was neither of those things. At some point that morning, estate workers heard a single shot. Then two men were seen coming out of the wood at speed, carrying the guns and going back toward the house. Cecil Hambrough was found dead, and here is the fact that made this a case rather than an accident. Monson said the young man had shot himself accidentally while climbing over a wall. A local doctor accepted it. Cecil Hambrough was buried within about 2 days. And then somebody looked at the paperwork. There were 2 life insurance policies on Cecil Hambrough, together worth £20,000, and they had been arranged in the days immediately before he died. The beneficiary was Monson's wife. Cecil Hambrough was exhumed. Alfred Monson was arrested. Edward Scott disappeared and was never found. And in December of 1893, Scotland put on a trial that ran for 10 days and produced one of the strangest verdicts in the world. Scots law has 3 verdicts, not 2. Guilty, not guilty, and not proven. Ardlamont, Argyll, Scotland. August 1893. A 20-year-old a year away from a fortune. A tutor who had been declared bankrupt the year before and had forged a signature to rent the estate. And on the night before he died, the same young man had nearly drowned when a boat sank under him. If you are new here, this is Cold Case Redemption. This is the only case on this channel where the jury was allowed to say what juries usually think and never get to say. Not proven means exactly that. We are not satisfied he is innocent, and we are not satisfied the Crown has proved it. Subscribe and stay with me. Cecil Hambrough came from a family that had been rich and was no longer managing it well. The money was tied up in a trust from a London banking fortune, and he would come into it at 21. His father, a retired major, was in serious debt. Around 1890, Major Hambrough engaged Alfred Monson as a private tutor for his son. Monson was charming, well-connected by marriage, and a fraud. He was fond of saying that he never pursued the acquaintance of anyone who could not be useful to him. He had a long record of insurance claims, unpaid loans, and businesses that collapsed. He was declared bankrupt in 1892. Cecil moved in with the Monson family and lived with them, his wife, and their 3 children. His father tried to break it up. He wrote, he warned. By 1892, the 2 men had fallen out completely. Cecil stayed with a tutor. In May of 1893, Monson took the lease of Ardlamont, a large sporting estate in Argyll, in Cecil's name. It emerged at the trial that he had forged a signature to obtain it, and that he could not have paid for it. In August, a man arrived at the estate and was introduced as Edward Scott, a boating engineer and a friend. He was really a bookmaker's clerk from London named Edward Sweeney, and he had used other names besides. On the night of the 9th of August, Monson and Cecil Hambrough went out fishing on the loch in a small boat. The boat took water and sank. Cecil Hambrough could not swim, and he was left standing on a rock. Monson swam to shore, found another boat, rowed back, and brought him in. On its own, that reads as a man saving somebody's life. At the trial, the Crown said the boat had been holed deliberately. The defense said it was an old boat on a rocky shore. The following morning, the 3 of them went out shooting rabbits. Monson carried a 20 gauge. Hambrough carried a 12 gauge. Scott carried nothing, because his job was to pick up the game. Estate workers heard 1 shot. Shortly afterward, they saw Monson and Scott coming out of the wood carrying the guns. The butler asked where Mr. Hambrough was. Monson said he had accidentally shot himself getting over a wall. A doctor came, accepted the account, and certified an accident. There was no proper examination at the time. Cecil Hambrough was buried within about 2 days, and that would have been the end of it. What ended the quiet was an insurance clerk. 2 policies on Cecil Hambrough's life, worth £20,000 together, had been taken out in the weeks before his death. They were assigned to Monson's wife, and the paperwork on the second one had been completed only days before the shooting. The body was exhumed and examined properly, and the medical men who did it did not accept the accident. One of them was Joseph Bell, the Edinburgh surgeon whose diagnostic manner Arthur Conan Doyle had used as the model for Sherlock Holmes. Another was Henry Littlejohn, the Edinburgh police surgeon, who was the other half of the same forensic tradition. Both concluded that the wound could not have been self-inflicted at all, and Bell went further and told the jury he believed Monson had killed him. Monson was charged with murder, and with the attempted murder of the same young man in the boat the night before. Edward Scott vanished before the trial and was never traced. He did not give evidence, and nobody has ever established who he really was beyond the alias. The trial began on the 12th of December, 1893, and ran for 10 days. It was the biggest story in Britain that winter. The illustrated papers covered every day of it. Monson's advocate was John Comrie Thompson, and he did the one thing that could work. He produced a professor of forensic medicine, Matthew Hay, who directly contradicted Bell and Littlejohn and said the wound was consistent with an accident. So, the jury had the most eminent medical men in Scotland flatly disagreeing with each other in front of them, and the judge, in his charge, reminded the jury of something that decided it. "It is the business of the Crown to prove the case," he said. "It is not for the defense to prove innocence." The jury retired and came back in 73 minutes, not proven. Alfred Monson walked out of the High Court of Justiciary a free man. Free, but not acquitted in the sense anybody outside Scotland would understand. The jury had declined to say he had not done it. He came out to a public reception that was not warm. In Scotland, his name was finished. And then, in 1894, Madame Tussauds put a model of him in London. They placed it near the entrance to the Chamber of Horrors, alongside a gun and a model of the estate. Monson sued for libel, arguing that putting him there implied he was a murderer when no court had said so. He won. The court accepted that a waxwork could be defamatory without a single word being written, and the jury awarded him 1 farthing in damages, which was the smallest coin in circulation and the clearest possible statement of what they thought of him. That case, Monson against Tussauds, established libel by innuendo in English law and is still cited. Monson was later convicted of insurance fraud in an unrelated matter and sent to prison. He died in obscurity, and for years afterward, on the 10th of August, Cecil Hambrough's family placed a notice in the national papers, sacred to the memory of Cecil Dudley Hambrough, shot in a wood near Ardlamont on the 10th of August, 1893. They ran it every year. It was the only verdict they could get. So here is what is honestly established. A 20-year-old with a fortune coming was shot dead in a wood in the company of 2 men, one of whom was insured against his death for £20,000 through his wife. Established, the same young man had nearly drowned the previous night in the company of the same man. Not established what actually happened in that wood, because the medical evidence was genuinely contested and the third man vanished. Here is what I keep coming back to. Edward Scott was never traced. There was a third man in that wood, under a false name, who left before he could be questioned, and no court ever heard a word from him. This case has never been resolved, and the verdict itself says so out loud. If this one stayed with you, share it, and tell me whether you think not proven is an honest verdict or a cowardly one. Subscribe to Cold Case Redemption, a new case every week. I will see you in the next one.